Hi, I'm Mark and welcome back to Crazy Nose, the Materials Edition, where today we're going to take a look at vetiver. And I brought three examples with me here today. The two on my left here are natural materials and the one on the right is a synthetic. But before we move into the evaluation, let's just refresh our minds on what vetiver actually is. So vetiver is a tall clumping grass that grows in marshlands and swamps and is harvested mostly in tropical regions. Once it's harvested, the green top is removed and then the roots are distilled with a steam distillation process to extract the essential oil. The essential oil is highly prized by perfumers not just for its complex fragrance, but also for the contribution it can make to the structure of a perfume, and I'll talk about that a bit further on. So I have the three materials here, starting with the one on the left. This one is Vetiver Bourbon Signature Oil. So this is an essential oil and it was produced by the French company Biolandis. I purchased it through Freighterworks in New Zealand and it cost me $3 for the gram. Now the source of the grass for this was the island of Madagascar, and this comes from the region that is known as the Bourbon region of perfumery materials. So it includes the island of Madagascar and also importantly the Reunion Island or La Réunion, which is just to the east of Madagascar. And originally, back in the 17th and 18th century, Reunion Island had a different name. It was called Ile Bourbon, named after the reigning monarch in France. Now, of course, the French had a revolution and they decided they didn't much want their territories named after monarchs, so they then renamed it to La Réunion. But that's where the name Bourbon comes from, and it's usually applied to materials that come from Madagascar or Reunion Island. So we move on then to this one here. This is Vetiver Bourbon Absolute, and this, as the name implies, also comes from Madagascar. But the manufacturer here is a different French company. It's the company called Maine or Maine. And they would have started with the essential oil and then put it through a further refinement process using a solvent extraction to extract the more desirable molecules out of the oil and leave behind some of the less desirable molecules that can muddy up a composition. So this one, again, I purchased this through Freighterworks and it cost me $6.26 for the gram. However, it's important to note that this is a 50% dilution in here. So that would make this actually at 100%, it would be about $12.50 a gram. Still not crazy expensive, but 4 times the price of the essential oil. Fair enough, I guess, because it's had to go through that extra process. Now, then we come to the last material here, and this is called Vetiver Acetate. And this is a purely synthetic material. How this is produced, they start off with an alcohol, a vetiver alcohol that's taken from the oil, and then they acetylize it using acetic acid or vinegar in common language, and they turn it into an acetate. Don't worry too much about the chemistry. It's more important to understand that this is a single molecule that's designed to replicate the smell of the natural material. And I sourced this one also through Freighterworks. It was the same manufacturer, so Maine is the same company that manufactures the acetate, and I sourced it through Freighterworks, and this one cost me $6.93, so it's somewhere between the essential oil and the absolute in terms of cost. All right, well now let's get into the evaluation and see what these things actually smell like. We'll start with the essential oil here because that's the most basic form that would have been used for hundreds of years in perfumery. I'll put this scent strip in and describe it to you now. It's coming out of here quite thick. It's like a rich, dark honey colour. I'll show it to you in a moment, and it's quite viscous, almost like honey actually. Hopefully the camera will pick this up. Yeah, it's a nice golden colour. Let's see what it smells like. Yeah, that's a beautiful, rich, earthy smell here. So the first thing I'm picking up here, there's this smokiness and earthiness to it, and it almost smells a bit like peat moss, a kind of smoky peat moss smell. It reminds me a little bit of the smell of the Scottish malt whiskies from Islay, where they use peat moss to make the whiskey to create the malt. And so the whiskey finishes up smelling a bit smoky and peaty, and this is the kind of smell I'm getting in here. It's really interesting. It's almost a little bit boozy. That might be something to do with the alcohol solvent that's in the bottle, and maybe that will change when it dries down a bit. But in the opening here, there's a lot of this peaty smoke smell, a very earthy smell for sure. A little bit of charred wood, almost like the charred barrel, oak barrel that the whiskey comes out of. And then we've got the other main note that you may have heard me refer to in other videos. So I always pick up this nutty smell in vetiver, and it's coming through clearly here. So it's an interesting, I quite often talk about it as being a peanut smell, but smelling it here in isolation, I would describe it as somewhere between a scorched peanut and a hazelnut. It's a beautiful nut smell, especially if you're someone who likes nuts as I do. But yeah, it's a beautiful nutty, grassy, smoky, almost a boozy smell here. Very interesting, very complex, very rich, and very likeable as far as I'm concerned. Okay, so let's put a strip in this Absolute now. I expect this one to be maybe not quite as complex, but should have a similar smell, I would expect. This one's coming out even darker on the strip here. It's almost a caramel colour. A similar consistency, but just a little bit darker on the strip. I'll just try and show that to you if I can. And now this is it's quite different in the opening here. So what I'm picking up on this one, there's almost a tart vinegar smell in the top of this. Yeah, interesting. I don't know if that's something to do with the solvent or the actual material, because this is a 50% dilution in here with TEC solvent, but it's definitely a vinegar smell. Just see if we can dry it off a bit. Yeah, you know what it smells like? It smells like a really nice balsamic vinegar. So when I say balsamic, that word gets thrown around rather recklessly describing perfumes. What I mean in this context here, I'm talking about the balsamic, the dark black vinegar that comes from Modena in Italy. That's made from a grape must. And yeah, it's got that rich, dark, almost caramel-like balsamic vinegar smell. Beautiful. Now we've got the smokiness in here as well, and we've got a bit of that grassroot rhizome smell going on underneath that. There's a little bit of another smell in there that I hope I'm not going to put anyone off in describing this, but when I walk into a McDonald's restaurant, there's this unique smell that only McDonald's has, and it's kind of the combination of that burnt burger meat smell and then something sort of sweet and like a pickle smell. I think it's probably the pickles they put in the burger. And that combines with that scorched meat smell and then maybe some of the sugar out of the buns they use. But it makes this sickly sweet concoction of meat and pickle, and it's kind of really unpleasant. I don't like it. I very rarely eat McDonald's, but if I do have a McDonald's burger, I can't eat it in the restaurant. I have to eat it outside or in the car because I just can't tolerate that smell. And I'm sorry to say, there's a little bit of that coming through in here. But it's not so bad because it's quite subtle, and the dominant note in here is definitely this balsamic vinegar and that smoky grassroots smell. So I wouldn't be necessarily put off by the McDonald's smell, but I have to call it out. Yeah, so again, very complex, very interesting, quite a bit different from the essential oil, but still unmistakably, I would say, a vetiver smell. So now let's find out how good a job our chemical engineers have done with this synthetic material. So this is the acetate now, and this one's coming out a sort of pale straw yellow colour, not nearly as viscous. I can tell by the way it's running down the paper right now. I'll just see if you can see that on the camera, but that one's just a pale straw yellow or lemon colour. Yeah, so this one's different again, as you'd expect. Not nearly as earthy, but interestingly, there's another vinegar top note coming through in this as well. So I'm not sure again whether that's the solvent or in this case it could be some residual acetic acid that's been left over in the manufacturing, but it does have a kind of vinegar top note. It actually smells a bit like you've dipped paper into vinegar. Not a rich balsamic vinegar like this one, but just a plain white vinegar. And then the other note that I'm picking up really clearly here, which is interesting, it's the note of what I would call jute string. So jute string is that old-fashioned brown string that people used to tie up their parcels with. I still have a big ball of it actually. I use it to tie up tomato plants in the garden. It's still commonly available. And it definitely, this has that jute string smell to it. Yeah, for sure. Not much earthiness in here, not a lot of smokiness and no real nuttiness going on here. It's a much thinner profile than the other two. It's really about that sort of vinegar, paper and jute string smell. All right. So I did do some dry down strips of these. I dipped some strips yesterday actually, 24 hours ago now, so I could describe the dry downs to you. And I know 24 hours sounds like a long time, but the essential oil of vetiver is a very persistent material. It will last at least for a week on a paper strip, so 24 hours is not going to make that big a difference, but I expect there will be some difference in the smell here. So this is the essential oil. Yeah, so it has changed quite a bit here. We've lost the real peaty, smoky peat whiskey smell now. We've still got some of the charred wood, but yeah, there's still the nuttiness in there and the charred wood, but there's a new kind of note coming through in this now too. And again, it's a kind of jute smell, but this is more like a jute rope. You know, the kind of ropes that they used to tie up the old sailing ships with? This is a coarser and kind of warmer texture than the string note that I was picking up in the acetate, but it's a real ropey smell. Yeah. I guess it makes sense because after all, like jute is a grass and so is vetiver, and you'd expect some sort of common smells coming from two grasses that are then subsequently turned into finished materials. Interesting. So then we'll come to the absolute, so the dry down of the absolute material. Yeah, so this has changed a lot too. We don't have any more this balsamic vinegar top note coming through here, and I'm pleased to say there's no McDonald's smell in here either, which is nice. Actually, there's almost a drier wood smell coming through here now, like a cedar wood, like cedar wood shavings. And there's some smoke, still the smoke note, subtle, but it's there. And interestingly, it's combining the two, the cedar wood and the smoke are combining perhaps with a little bit of that vinegar top note that's just surviving, and it's creating a kind of accord for me. The accord I'm thinking of is a tree resin, so it's a bark tree resin accord, not unlike a frankincense or a myrrh, which is really quite nice. Quite an evolution from where it started out. Yeah, very complex, these materials, and very interesting. Okay, so let's look at the acetate then. I've got the dry down on that. Yeah, so that acetic vinegar smell has gone from this. We've still got the clear smell of the jute string here, but we don't have that wet paper soaked in vinegar smell. But what we do have, what's replaced it, to my nose, is the smell of cardboard. So if you imagine a facility, storage facility or a warehouse where they've stacked up a bunch of cardboard boxes in the corner and they've been standing there for some time and they've absorbed some of the moisture out of the environment and they've gone a little bit musty, that's the kind of smell I'm getting here, this sort of musty cardboard smell that's combining with the smell of the jute string. So it has evolved a bit, but still a very much simpler profile than what we have in the other three. All right, well, let's summarise what we've got here. If I was a judge giving out awards, I would score it like this: gold, silver and bronze, I think. There's a reason I say that. I actually prefer the smell of the essential oil to the absolute, even though it's 4 times cheaper. But to me, it's just a little more complex and really interesting in the way it evolves from this sort of peat moss, smoky peat moss whiskey top or opening, coming down to more earthy tones and charred wood, and then a ropey kind of note coming through in that. It's really got a story to it, and it's a very complex profile. That's not to say that the absolute is lacking in complexity. It has a lot going on in there as well. I do really like that balsamic vinegar opening, although I don't know that that's a classical vetiver note. I like the way it dries down and becomes kind of like a tree resin, like a frankincense or a myrrh. But if I wanted to get those notes in a perfume, I'd be inclined just to grab the frankincense or myrrh rather than vetiver. But it's still a very nice material. I would just favour the essential oil, particularly given the price difference. And then coming to the acetate is much more simplistic. It's very much about this sort of vinegar, cardboard and string smell. I don't think that those are particular notes you would want in a perfume as a detectable note, unless you were trying to make, I don't know, a perfume that's brown paper packages tied up with string for Julie Andrews. But I think that it's probably more going to be used for structural reasons, that one. So let's just talk about that. Where would perfumers use these materials? So they do have this beautiful earthy smell, and they do contribute to the structure of the perfume. And how they do that, vetiver can create kind of a vertical wood backbone in a perfume that you can then hang other notes off. And it also, because it's a natural material that has at the bottom end these deep earthy tones and wood and smoke tones, and at the top it has some grassy notes, it can bridge very well from, you know, top notes of citrus and florals down into deeper woody base notes. And also it has the ability to dry out a composition. So if a composition's getting too syrupy, too cloying with, you know, too many sweet notes up in the top, be they gourmands or florals or citrus or whatever, by adding some vetiver, you can sort of dry things out and just make it a little more grown up. It almost acts like the tannin in a red wine, where if a red wine's too sweet and you add more tannin to it, it just sort of makes it pucker up and makes it a bit drier to the palate. So it can do a lot of things in a composition, and that's why it's quite prized, and it's pretty well priced, I have to say. Okay, so people ask me to talk about perfumes where the material is prevalent and can be detected. And there's so many, really. If you look on Fragrantica, there's many perfumes that list vetiver in the note list. But I brought along a couple of strips today just to talk about from my own collection. And the first one is L'Air du Désert Marocain by Andy Tower. I sprayed this about 6 hours ago, and the reason I've done that is because the vetiver doesn't really come through a lot in the opening of these perfumes. It's more in the dry down where you pick it up. Now, this is a beautiful perfume, and for me, in the opening, it almost smells a bit chocolatey. But now in the dry down, you really get down to the desert, the smell of the desert and the desert sand. But what I pick up in that base here is the smell of an earthy smokiness. And I think that that is definitely coming from the vetiver in this composition. Yeah. It's a beautiful perfume. So that's that one. And then the other one I like, and I've done a video on this one if you want to watch it, but this is Bonne Chauffe by Frapin. And what I like about this perfume is it's a beautiful evocation of the smells of a winery. And I know exactly those smells because I worked in a winery, and it really captures perfectly the smell of the crushed grapes and the musts and the oak barrels and the lees in the wine, which is a kind of biscuity smell. But in my description of that, I talk about just the image of someone taking some unused oak staves off an old barrel and putting them onto a fire, an open fireplace, and smelling the smoke coming off that burning oak. And now when I smell this in the dry down, I can tell that that's coming from the vetiver, because you've got this sort of smoky, scorched wood smell, charred wood, but there's also an earthiness to it. And it's a bit like the actual outside of the wine barrels. So the wine barrels get rolled around the winery all the time, and they get very dirty on the outside. So if you smell one, it smells like a combination of oak wood, but also the dirt and the earth off the floor of the winery. And this definitely has that kind of charred wood and earth smell to it, which I think would be coming from the vetiver. Yeah, very, very well blended, this one. So those are two. There are many more, as I said. I mean, there's obvious ones like Vetiver by Guerlain. That's a masculine fragrance, and it settles down into some nice smoky woods down in the base. It starts out with bright citruses, but it definitely goes down into the smoky, earthy woods in the base of that one. There's also Sycomore by Chanel. That's a more unisex fragrance. Again, it starts off brighter, but it finishes up on some really nice, dry, smoky ash wood smells, and that would definitely be a good example of vetiver as well. But you probably have your own examples, and if you do, please can you put them in the comment section, let us know, share it with the community. Tell me, what are your favourite vetiver fragrances, and if you're a DIY perfumer, where do you like to use the material in your blending, and which material do you like to use most? I haven't sampled every vetiver material that's out there, so you might have a favourite that you want to call out. Please do that. And thanks again for tuning in. If you've lasted this long, thanks so much for your patience and for staying with me. And thank you to everyone who's subscribed to the channel. And if you haven't as yet subscribed, if you don't want to miss any future content, most of my videos are these sort of educational format videos that talk about the materials and what they actually smell like. I do cover perfume reviews as well, and just as I do with these reviews, I don't rely on note lists, I don't rely on marketing, I just tell you what I smell. So if that's the sort of thing that you think you'd be interested in, consider subscribing and hitting the notification bell so you'll know when the next one drops. And until the next one, take care, stay safe, and enjoy your fragrances, whatever you're wearing.
Oh, my muse, you're heavy debt. A ghost I haven't quite finished yet. Lead me down where the briars grow, to the hidden roots that the crows all know.